Hello and welcome to the lecture for Chapter 9. As you can see on this slide, this chapter deals with the strategic position that you'll choose for your company and risk analysis, two things that often go hand in hand. A couple of things I'm going to talk about in this lecture is answering the fundamental question, why should customers buy from you? Unfortunately, that's a question that a lot of small business people don't stop to ask when they jump into business. They start a business more for their own needs than for the needs of their customers, and that can often be a fatal flaw. Talk about defining what you do and don't do and the risks of trying to do too much. Talk about different kinds of strategic positions that you can take for your firm. And then we'll talk about balancing risks and then risks and opportunities briefly. So the question of why customers should buy from you, there's a couple of answers to that. And again, it's key that you shouldn't be just the next person offering more of the same thing. You have to do something unique in order to find your place in the market and attract customers. So one thing would be, do you offer something that your competitors don't? You know, if you look at, we talked in the last lecture about really studying your competitors, it could be that all of them are missing something, and that's something that you can do. Now, it has to be something customers care about. In the case of my old business, the playground company, I looked at all of my competitors and none of them were talking or acting in any way in a green perspective. They weren't using recycled content. They weren't taking other steps to be a greener company. So that was something I could offer to my customers, a greener product that nobody else was offering. The problem with that is oftentimes if you're successful at it, then your competitors will catch on to that and they'll start offering that as well, and there goes your advantage. So that could be an issue. So it has to be something potentially that you can protect that other people can't do. Can you offer the same thing as your competitors but at a better price? So that's often very difficult to do for a startup because your competitors generally have been in business for a while and they have something called economies of scale, meaning they purchase more of the raw materials needed to make the product than you do. And often the more you purchase, the bigger discount you get, the lower price you pay. So bigger competitors often have a built-in advantage when it comes to lower cost and the ability to offer customers lower prices. So competing on price is very difficult to do for a startup. I wouldn't recommend that unless you figured out how to build a better mousetrap. Do you offer a more convenient mix of products and services? And then do you offer superior service? Those are two things that are often an advantage of a small business. So because you can be hyper local, you can know your customers by name, you can tailor products to a small group of customers, and that can often be an advantage over bigger companies that, of course, find it difficult to do that. And then lastly, are you conveniently located? This could come down to what side of the road you're on. If you have a brew pub and there's a predominant flow of traffic out of a town towards suburbs at the end of the day, and you hope to attract people at the end of the day, you'd like to be on the right side of the road versus the left side for traffic that's leaving the city and going to the suburbs, as an example. Being located close to your customers can be an advantage. So the strategic position you choose should be where the following items come together. So one, your strengths and interest. What are you good at? What really gets you jazzed? Those kinds of things. Industry trends and developments. So which direction is the whole industry going? And what are new things coming to the industry, either technology or ingredients or manufacturing methods? What are the trends in that direction? And then what are the market changes and opportunities? So what has changed? I would imagine that COVID and people being quarantined and having to stay at home probably had a big impact on how certain beers were packaged and how they were sold at different retail locations. I would imagine that large breweries did less business in forms of keg and more in forms of cans and bottles, as an example. That would be an example of the market changing. Now, both of those industry trends and market changes, you have to look at it not from your perspective as a manufacturer or as a producer, but from their perspective of customers, something that matters or is relevant to them. There could be competitive changes and opportunities. So like, as an example, customers could sour on the fact that there are dominant companies in an industry, like in the case of beer, I think it's ABB, the company that owns Anheuser-Busch, gobbling up a lot of smaller breweries. And customers could react negatively to that, like those companies are pretending to be local when they're not really local, that sort of thing. And then there could be changes and opportunities brought through new technology. Uber is an example of that. And there may be examples in your business where a new technology could give you an advantage that, or give you a position that other companies can't necessarily replicate. So this is very important. That's why there's so little on this slide. The strategic position you choose should define what you do, and almost more important, what you will not do. So it's really tempting in business to say yes to everything. Every single opportunity, yeah, I'll be there. Every type of brew fest, every type of customer gathering, I'll be there. And the problem with that is if you tailor yourself to each of those opportunities, in trying to become all things to all people, you can become nothing special to anybody. So it's just as important to decide what you're not going to do as it is to decide what you will do. And your strategic position should guide that. That's not to say that it's chiseled in stone. If you decide on a strategic position and after 6 months it isn't bringing the success you thought, well, then adapt. That's the important thing. You shouldn't be stuck in what you decided before. But it should be a conscious decision based on this position you've taken. So different customer perception factors. One is societal impact. So this, when I talk about customer perceptions, I'm talking about if I went and talked to customers about your company or about your product, what would they say about you and what matters to them? For some products, societal impact is important. I've taught entrepreneurship to students that wanted to start a marijuana store, a retail marijuana store that was focused on the benefits to military veterans that have PTSD, and that they would donate a portion of their profits to causes that help veterans with PTSD. That's the kind of thing where if somebody is deciding that they want to go out and buy some marijuana, they may choose that store because it aligns with their personal belief system or a cause they support. A couple of lectures ago, I talked about Tom Shoes. That's something, it's a company that's trying to make a difference in the world, and customers kind of vote with their purchasing dollars by supporting that particular company because it lines up with the impact that they hope to see in society in general. So that may be an opportunity for you to differentiate yourself from your competitors if you can find out things that your customers care about in ways that you can align your company with those particular causes. Now, of course, it has to be done from a source of genuine concern. It can't, if it's seen as something that's exploitive or something that you're doing just to make more money, it can certainly backfire. What features? So what features of your product appeal to customers? What are they looking for in products? And oftentimes the only way you can find this out is on all of these things actually is by talking to customers. You can't do that enough, and really listen for reading between the lines and what they're saying and what they're not saying. So price and quality are often trade-offs. Often the higher the quality means the higher the price because of the price of ingredients or the price of processing goes up or things like that. But that again can be a trade-off. It doesn't do you any good to brew the best beer possible if the selling price ends up being $20 for a 6-pack. You're probably not going to sell very many regardless of how high the quality is. So understanding what customers' limitations are with regard to price, you can also approach that from the other perspective. If somebody said, my beer is the best beer on the market, it's got fantastic ingredients, and I go through this long involved process to brew it, and I'm selling it for $5 for a 6-pack, I would kind of wonder if it's really as good as you say if the price is that low. So it can go both ways. So customer service, think about what kinds of customer service you like as a consumer. So do you like it when you can get a human on the phone when you call versus having to go through a phone tree and talk to robots? That's important. Try to replicate the things in your business that you appreciate when you're in the position of being a consumer. And then convenience. How can you'll never go broke betting on customers wanting more convenience. So how can you get your product into the hands of customers legally in the most convenient way? So the market segment strategy is often also referred to as a niche strategy. So we talked about this before when I gave the example of how I segmented the market for playground equipment and appealed to a narrow group. Well, one of the advantages here, and the reason this is included again under strategic position, is oftentimes a market niche, so a small group of customers, might not be a big enough market to be attractive to the big players, but it might be a nice market for you. As an example, if there is a market niche of people that are health fanatics, people that run Ironman triathlons, all of that, and there's a segment of that group that wants to buy beer, and you make a beer that's really oriented towards that group that helps them with carbo loading before their race, something like that. Well, that may be such a small group of customers that it isn't interesting for big breweries to go after and make a product for that group and market specifically to that group, but it might be a great market for a small business. So looking at a niche that you can take advantage of. And that niche could be defined either geographically, so a small area, could be based on age, income, interest of the individuals in that market, or it could be based on a specialized need. So market share strategy, again, is difficult for small businesses to pull off. But that's where you find an untapped market and you develop a product and become synonymous with what that market is. So you become the 800-pound gorilla and you grab customer mind share quickly, and then it's very difficult for other people to come into that market, even if they had a product that is potentially superior because somebody is dominant in that market. A good example of that is if I tell you low-cost airline, you probably think of Southwest Airlines. If I told you to do an internet search, you probably wouldn't use Bing. You would probably Google it. So oftentimes those companies, actually their name becomes a verb, Google it, right? So it's difficult for a small business to do that, but that is one strategy, is to kind of own a particular market. Some other strategies, one is to have an operational or technical advantage, and that could be something that is patented that you then prevent other people from doing the same way. You may figure out a different way to make a particular product that either makes the product better or allows you to produce the product more cheaply that could be unique to you. That is a particular strategy. You could have a proprietary advantage, meaning access to a particular kind of ingredient that no one else can get, that you've managed to lock up, or again, a process that you've managed to patent that other people can't. So you could have something about your business that's unique that other people can't copy. Sales channels, that's alternate ways of selling product other than what's traditional. For example, if you want to buy a Dell computer, you do it through their website. You don't go to a Dell store to buy it. Scentsy pots, those things that you burn scented wax to make your house smell good, those are sold through parties that people have in their home, and they'll invite people over and people will purchase the product from a friend of theirs. So are there other ways that you can get products to customers that are outside the norm? Your business model might be different. A good example of that, back in the 90s, there were a lot of tech companies that would offer a free version of the product and then allow you to pay for upgrades. There's games now online where you get a free version and then you pay for upgrades. So are there ways that you could structure your business the way you offer your products to customers that's different than what's currently being done and unique. First mover status is getting there first and being the first one to the market. Lean startup is really the whole process of trying something, measuring the impact of it. Did it work? Did it not work? Adapting where it didn't work and trying again. That kind of continuous process of experimentation can often lead to something that's unique and pretty good. Branding is the impression that customers get about your product, how they feel about your product. If I ask the customer directly what they would say about your business and your company. And everything you do should reinforce the brand that you intend for customers to perceive about your company. So all of your advertisements, all of your, if you have any coasters or little giveaways, printed objects, things like that, hats, t-shirts, everything should scream the brand that you want to convey to customers, right down to the font. When I chose that I would use the green position for my playground company, you can probably guess all of my printed literature was printed on paper that was obviously recycled. It had the feel of recycled paper, and it was stamped on the back as being made from 100% recycled content. So everything we did was meant to reinforce that green message. Now, a little bit about risk and how you'll talk about that when it comes to talking to your potential investors or potential lenders. If you don't mention risk, it's going to appear naive. Somebody reading it is going to think that you just didn't think enough about the subject to be able to identify what obvious risks there are. Every single business on the planet faces risk. And there's different strategies that you can employ to mitigate those risks. The purpose of a risk segment or paragraphs about risk in a business plan isn't to identify every single risk that might exist and what you would do about it. What am I going to do if a tornado hits my building or whatever the case is? But it's just to identify the top key risks and then have some thoughts about what you would do in response to if that risk really came to fruition. So one is a market risk. That means that the market won't accept what you're offering. They won't like your pumpkin oatmeal stout beer or whatever the case is, or the market won't be big enough to sustain that particular product. So what will you do in the event that happens? How will you pivot? Another is competitive risk. That means a big competitor copies you or leapfrogs you, jumps ahead of you, and you lose the advantage that you started with. What will you do in that regard? Technology risk is and this isn't necessarily so much applicable to what you're doing, but it could be what if the technology you're using or you're depending upon fails or stops working, or there is new technology that goes ahead of that puts you at a disadvantage. And the last is product risk. What if the product that you make gets people sick? As an example, I certainly dealt with this in the playground industry. What if the products I produced hurt a child or caused a death or something like that? What would I do about that? So one way to deal with a lot of these risks is insurance. So how will you insure your business? How will you protect yourself against these kinds of particular outcomes? But again, the key thing is thinking about what you would do if these happen. So some additional risks. One is execution risk. Are we actually going to be able to pull off what we are saying we're going to do? Maybe a fallback position. If you're saying I'm going to brew all of my products myself and can all of them or bottle all of them myself, a fallback position to execution risk would be I'll subcontract that out to brewery X or whatever the case is. Capitalization risk means you run out of money. So what happens if you run out of money and you're not to market with your product yet where you can start earning revenue? What will you do then? And then global risk, certainly a pandemic or something like that falls into that category. I would tend to focus on risks that are unique to your particular business. That's really going to show a reader that you've thought diligently about what those risks might be and what you might do about it, as opposed to what are you going to do if there's another pandemic or something like that that faces all businesses. One way to look at your business that I think can be helpful is something called a SWOT analysis, SWOT, and that stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So the strengths and weaknesses, that's an internal focus. So looking at your business, your team, and of course, if you haven't yet started your business, this could be what you believe is going to be the case, what you anticipate. What do you anticipate your strengths to be? What do you anticipate your weaknesses to be? Both in terms of people, in terms of production facilities, in terms of the competitors going up against, all of that. But it's an internal focus. The other section is opportunities and threats. So what opportunities exist that you could try to take advantage of, kind of an offensive strategy? And threats, what if bad things happen? What is your defensive strategy to overcome those? So there could be legislative threats. What if the law changes and that impacts your business in a negative way? So those kinds of things. So strengths and weaknesses is internal, opportunities and threats are external. And it's really important to do this as objectively as possible. It's really easy to kind of get in a circle and pat the person to the right on the back, and everybody congratulate each other about how they have nothing but strengths and nothing but opportunities. And that's kind of a self-serving exercise. It doesn't really help you or anybody. So it's important to really be objective about this. And a lot of times doing it in a group really helps. And so the result of this can be strategies then to correct your weaknesses, fix those things, use your strengths to take advantage of opportunities, and then employ defensive strategies to avoid or mitigate threats to the business. That kind of is what can result from this. So if you have any questions, please shoot me an email. I look forward to reading these sections. Thank you.